In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the big test of election security. Cyber experts brace for attacks in the final stretch of the U.S. midterms. Have Facebook, Twitter, and other platforms done enough to thwart fake news, misinformation, and meddling? Plus, the most influential tech investor from Russia isn't overly concerned about Facebook and election meddling. We will hear from DST Global founder Yuri Milner. And Apple shares sink on reports it's halted a production boost of one of its newest iPhone models. We'll look at the outlook for the tech giant's biggest product category. But first, to our top story, we are in the final stretch ahead of the U.S. midterm elections, and cybersecurity experts are bracing for possible attacks. Tuesday's poll will be the first real test of election security since the 2016 elections. And while social media sites have attempted to crack down on fake news by deleting accounts and removing posts, even they admit the battle against election interference is unlikely to be won. The biggest threat may not be fake news in itself, but misinformation. At the 11th hour, Facebook has pulled a controversial ad about the migrant caravan heading toward the U.S.-Mexico border, an ad backed by President Trump. To discuss all of the issues around this, we've got the CEO of Area 1 Security, Oren Falkowitz, with us, as well as Bloomberg Tech's Austin Carr from New York. Austin, I want to start with you. Give us the lay of the land. How secure are the elections at this very moment?
I think it remains to be seen. I mean, we have seen in the last couple of weeks, more months, that the big tech giants, the internet giants like Google, Facebook, and Twitter are trying to be a lot more proactive in the content that they take down on the platform. At the same time, we're really not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. If you rewind the clock back to 2016, let's remember that only a week after that election, Mark Zuckerberg said it was crazy, the idea that that the network had any impact on the election. And then it wasn't until March 2018 that the Cambridge Analytica scandal had hit. So it's really, we're not going to know for sure tomorrow whether anything goes wrong with the election. It might take weeks or months after before they can do a full deep dive into that. But leading up to it, they're definitely trying to be a lot more proactive in the content that they take down and also manage expectations about how secure their platforms actually are.
At this hour, Oren, what are the threats that you are most concerned about?
Well, unfortunately, the cybersecurity doom narrative has become really embellished. And so what that's done is it's not allowed us to take action and to do things about stopping damages. The race to hack the 2020 elections will begin on Wednesday. And since 2016, as Austin pointed out, very little has been done. John Podesta was caught in a phishing scheme, and that remains one of the biggest threats to candidates and campaigns out there. And candidates, over 1,460 of them on the ballot tomorrow, have done very little to protect themselves. And we need to just get out in front of this more quickly for 2020.
Austin, it's been pointed out that, Mark Zuckerberg, despite all of the efforts that Facebook has made leading up to this, they've got a whole election war room that is operating as we speak. He's never claimed that Facebook is fixed. And in fact, they've emphasized there's no way they can really stay ahead of all the bad actors or say that they can with complete confidence. We're just getting news that Facebook has pulled this controversial campaign ad that was backed by President Trump, which claims that this migrant caravan is filled with, quote, dangerous illegal criminals. A couple of media outlets have already pulled this ad, but it's this kind of controversy that, could incite more anger and potentially retaliation. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, on the earnings call last week, Mark Zuckerberg did spend a lot of time managing expectations and just saying they're never going to be perfect. There's going to be things that slip through the cracks. But I think the larger issues that they're going to have to contend with are, what do you do with content that's not so much fake news as it is skewed news or misinformation? My colleague Sarah Fryer was out with a story just last night about this topic and just showing how the company is really struggling to grapple with this content that would not be categorized as disinformation or fake news from hoax publishers, but more just content that sort of gets viral on its own because it's more polarized. It leans right or it leans left, and that's more likely to go and spread across the network. How do you deal with that content? Do you proactively take it down, or is that just in the category of free speech? Those are sort of the big challenges you're seeing Facebook and Twitter dealing with leading up to tomorrow's election.
As for this particular ad, Facebook said it violates their ad policy against sensational content. The video is allowed to be posted on Facebook, but cannot receive paid distribution. Oren, what power do voters and users have right now? What should we be aware of? What should we be able to spot?
Well, voters have all the power. They can go to the polls tomorrow and they can elect leaders who are going to take cybersecurity seriously and craft legislation that's going to change what we're seeing today. And they can also vote for products and for technologies that protect their privacy and that take security seriously. So tomorrow's a really important day, and every day is an important day to vote. You can vote with your dollars. You can vote to send the right people to Washington and to the State House who are going to do something about this. Very little has been done since this has become more aware to everybody since the 2016 elections. And it's important to get out there tomorrow and make your voice heard.
Meantime, Austin, we're already becoming aware of some threats. Senator Joe Manchin, for example, has announced that his social media accounts were compromised. Twitter has reportedly cracked down on a big voter suppression effort, thousands of accounts that could have been involved in this voter suppression effort on Twitter. But one of the things that I've seen pointed out is that the compromising of the elections in 2020 happens the day after the midterm. So on November 7th, we're going to be starting this process all over again.
That's correct. I mean, the fact is this is a never-ending challenge, and that's something that Mark Zuckerberg had talked about in the earnings call, and also something that Jack Dorsey would agree with at Twitter. These problems will never go away officially, no matter how much safety infrastructure you put in place, no matter how many algorithms you have to protect against these problems. I think what they're having to look ahead to is more how to managing these challenges. What do you do when they do discover that something slipped through the cracks? How safely can they protect the platform in the aftermath? And along the same lines, at what point do you get to I guess sort of a situation where you just have more users comfortable with the idea that this platform is going to be vulnerable the more you give it its data? That's just a part of the day-to-day of running a social network the size of Facebook.
If I could, I think the opportunity is, that's an opportunity what Austin described, right? The fact that it's so predictable that we know on Wednesday that hacks will start to influence the 2020 election gives us the opportunity to take advantage of it. These attacks are not sophisticated, they're not unprecedented, they're totally predictable. All it takes is a little bit of will and a little bit of smarts to get in front of it. We shouldn't look at that as being part of the doom story. We should look at that as part of our opportunity to take advantage of these incidents from destroying our democracy and our society.
All right. Well, November 7th will be the judge. All right. CEO of Area 1 Security, Oren Falkowitz, with us, as well as Bloomberg Tech's Austin Carr. Thank you both. Still ahead, my extended sit-down with DST Global founder Yuri Milner. Why he's not concerned about Facebook's existential crisis and even refutes that they're having one. And if you like Bloomberg News, you can check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. The most influential tech investor from Russia isn't especially concerned about Facebook and election meddling. DST Global founder Yuri Milner was an early investor in Facebook and Twitter, and after selling those stakes, went on to invest in Spotify and Airbnb. He's also backed Alibaba, Xiaomi, and Flipkart. We spoke with him at length from the Breakthrough Prize award ceremony in Mountain View, California, Sunday, the so-called Oscars of Science, which is not just backed by Milner, but also Mark Zuckerberg and Google co-founder Sergey Brin, to reward achievements in math, physics, and other sciences. I asked him if after 7 years, whether he felt the investment and exposure the ceremony provides has really helped move science forward.
What we believe this prize can catalyze is the public acceptance of science as an amazing achievement. We want to create a platform for scientists to become celebrities, similar to athletes and performers and entertainers. We all recognize, and you only need to look at social media to realize that scientists are not being celebrated. You know, they are doing amazing things, but nobody knows about them. So that's really number one goal for this prize. The second goal is inspire young generation to choose science as their career, and I think we are making progress there as well.
So, of the prizes being awarded tonight, what are the discoveries that you're most excited about?
Well, I would say maybe, I mean, they're all exciting, but the one that really I feel is very special is the Physics Prize, which is being awarded to Jocelyn Bell Burnell. And she's an incredible scientist from UK. He made a seminal discovery of pulsars. Those are special types of stars, fast rotating. And she was not quite recognized at the time of the discovery. And now this recognition is catching up with her.
I'm curious about your thoughts on the private space race happening now between whether it's Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson. You know, I know you've always been fascinated by space. How do you see that private space race playing out?
Okay, well, we have a couple of initiatives there too. You know, one is called Starshot. This is as opposed to the ones mentioned by Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Branson. This one is really focusing on interstellar travel. You know, they are focusing on our solar system. You know, chemical fuel is really the way to move around the solar system, but that's not going to work in interstellar travel. So the initiative that we are funding called Starshot, it is really trying to determine whether we have a feasible technology to move between stars. And the distances there are much, much bigger. And that's what we're working on.
What's been the progress?
Well, this is a 2-year-old initiative. We have committed $100 million to fund R&D phase. This will probably take another 5-7 years. And by that time, we'll be able to tell you whether this is a feasible and realistic to achieve this objective in the next 25-30 years.
So you're not competing with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos necessarily?
No. Well, you know, the universe is much bigger than just our solar system.
If you could put your bet on one of them, who would it be?
Well, I mean, they are all targeting different, you know, they all have their different objectives. You know, Elon is mostly focused on Mars. Jeff Bezos is focused on near-Earth, you know, orbits and moving industries there and things like that. Branson, I think, is interested in tourism. I think they're all slightly different, and the space is so big, so we need more of those.
You started this prize with Mark Zuckerberg, and you were an early backer of Facebook. Facebook's in a sort of existential crisis right now. Mark has said the next big pivot is going to be towards video, towards messaging. How optimistic are you about further growth in Facebook and social networks in general, given saturation, given privacy concerns, given this existential crisis?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that it's an existential crisis. I think it's a little bump on the road. I think that Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram are amazing products with more than 1 billion people each. So you can't really dismiss it as an existential crisis. But I think that Facebook always was and is an evolving system. And they've always been responding to challenges. And the challenges that they are facing can be solved through a combination of human attention and artificial intelligence elements. So, you know, there are always bad actors who are testing different products. But I feel confident that this will be taken care of through technology. You know, it's a technology company.
Run by humans.
Run by humans.
Who have to make the right decisions, right?
Yes.
So does it concern you that, you know, the privacy, the hacking, the potential election meddling, the fact that the founders of all the companies that you mentioned that Facebook bought have gone? One of them even tried to start a delete Facebook movement.
Well, everything should be put in perspective. If you look at other companies that did acquisitions, the founders of these companies stayed for an amazingly long time. I mean, it should be compared to other acquisitions. You know, it's very often happens that founders are gone in 12 months or in 6 months. You know, here I think they've stayed long enough to ensure continuity and transition And I think those products will do very well going forward.
Do you think that Facebook and Twitter, which is another company you backed, are living up to the expectations of people living in democracies, users living in democracies?
Well, democracy is an open system. It has this amazing, incredible achievement, which is called free speech. And there will always be bad actors who are abusing this gift that that has been given to them.
I know you've tried to keep your head above politics, but the geopolitical tensions, has that made your job more difficult as a bridge between Russia and Silicon Valley?
Well, I've never been a bridge between Russia and Silicon Valley, and never wanted to be.
But in a way you have.
I mean, I don't know about that.
Created relationships and connections.
You know, I've built a company in Russia, which is called Mail. I think this company is doing exactly what other social media has done around the world, meaning this company gave voice to dozens of millions of people. And then I started investing globally in places like China, India, US. We've been very fortunate to call some good investments. So I think that it's not really about building bridges, but I think it's about pursuing global agenda. That's the way I see my mission. And by the way, science is another platform which is intrinsically global. Our investments are completely business-driven, and I think it's spread out around the world roughly proportionate to the significance of technology which is being built around the world.
Yeah. So if someone were to say to you, did the Russians meddle in the election? Do you believe they did? How do you answer that?
I'm reading the same magazines and the newspapers as you're reading, so I have no special expertise here.
Softbank has a lot of money in the tech ecosystem, and the Saudis and the Saudi government have a lot of money in Softbank. There's a lot of controversy around it given the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Do you think it's a problem that Softbank has so much money in the tech ecosystem?
Well, I think we should be judging people based on the laws and the global situations that were at the time when they were making those investments and making those decisions. So going forward, things may be different. So I think, you know, people are learning as they go, and we have the last time we have been taking money from Russian investors was in 2011. So,
and that you made a choice.
Many things have changed since then, and our investor base is very global since that time.
And you made a purposeful decision to not take money from Russian investors.
Well, we've made a very conscious decision to diversify our investor base. And by the way, the main motivation for this was because our investments are global. It's kind of logical for us to have a very global investor base.
Just one more question. You've invested in, you know, Facebook and Alibaba and Flipkart. What do you think is the next big thing in technology, and where is the next big thing in terms of the hot region for tech investment?
Well, if you look at the previous 10 years, if you add US and China, that would be 90% of all value that was created in Internet. Europe is around 3%, the rest of the world around 7%. So logically speaking, you would think that Europe should be doing much better in the future, sort of catching up with US and China. I think China can increase their share as, you know, Chinese companies go global. I think it's not inconceivable to see more value accruing to Chinese companies. I think
more than there
US
is in the United
companies,
States?
Well, that remains to be seen, but I think the amazing success that the U.S. companies have enjoyed in the last 15, 20 years was really based on the fact that those are global companies.
My interview there with DST Global founder Yuri Milner. He said the next big thing in tech, he believes, will be AI. We'll have more from the Breakthrough Prize later this hour. Our interview with 23andMe CEO Anne Wojcicki is ahead. Now, in Japan, Softbank founder Masayoshi Son is starting to reap the benefits of his enormous investments in technology. Softbank reported second quarter profit that far exceeded the highest analyst estimate. Son has been remaking the company from primarily a telecom operator into a tech investment firm with his $100 billion vision fund. But Masayoshi Son began his earnings press conference by addressing another topic, what we had just spoken to Yuri Milner about, questions about the murder of a Saudi Arabian journalist and his relationship to the country.
I met with the Crown Prince and Saudi officials. I directly raised our concerns with them, and I asked for further clarity on this case. They said they are taking this very seriously.
Son said he pressed the Saudis to get to the bottom of the killing of the government critic Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi Arabia's agents and hold the guilty accountable. However, he said Softbank will continue to use Saudi money for investments because he has an obligation, he believes, to help the country diversify its dependence on oil. Coming up, Bloomberg Tech, live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology. Be sure to follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. IBM CEO Ginni Rometty is opening up her wallet, announcing she is buying about $3 million in company stock. This is just 1 week since IBM's $33 billion acquisition of Red Hat. Rometty will now own more than 314,000 shares of IBM. The company recently committed to buy back $4 billion worth of shares. Speaking of buybacks, the world's biggest paid service, Spotify, will buy back up to $1 billion of stock. Last week, the company's shares fell after its fourth quarter forecast fell short of some estimates. Spotify stock down more than 25% since hitting its peak in July. Up next, Apple changes its holiday plans. The company is said to no longer be ramping up production for its budget iPhone. We'll have more on that next. Plus, the FDA approves the first direct-to-consumer genetic test that aims to tell you what drugs will work best for you, made by 23andMe. CEO Anne Wojcicki responds to naysayers calling it dubious science. This is Bloomberg. Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Apple may be having second thoughts about the popularity of its budget iPhone. According to reports, the company is said to have halted a production boost for the iPhone XR from both Foxconn and Pegatron production lines. Apple shares and those of its major suppliers fell sharply Monday on this report, only adding to concerns about the outlook for its biggest product category. For more, we are joined by Walter Piecyk, BTIG analyst. He's got a buy rating on Apple with a price target of $235. And Mark Gurman, our Bloomberg Tech reporter, joining us from LA. So, Mark, what do we know?
Well, we know there's a report in the Nikkei overseas overnight indicating that Apple is cutting a couple of production lines related to this budget XR phone. And quite frankly, I'm a bit surprised that these reports aren't already built into the stock price. If you do a Google search on Nikkei iPhone order cuts, you'll see results ranging from, upwards of 4 or 5 years back. This is an annual story. I think it's a mix of what the publication is looking for, combined with adjustments that Apple makes after the initial, few opening weekends of new iPhone releases.
Walter, what's your reaction to this report? Does it raise an eyebrow?
I think just what Mark said, he profiled the fact that this has been going on for years. And actually, the company, to a certain extent, invited this. I mean, I think some of these things have been kind of ignored in recent years. There wasn't much of it even going into this quarter. And by the company talking about not reporting units going forward, they're going to allow stories like this to resonate more in the market because there's no data point that's going to follow when the company reports a unit number that may, contradict a lot of these, what I would call supply chain stories that tend to emerge before the quarter. So I think they haven't done themselves any service by saying they're not going to report units, because I think that actually helped to temper the impact that stories like this have had on the stock in some of the recent quarters.
You know, I seem to remember over the years, many times talking about these reports about production when it comes to Apple. Any little bit of information, analysts and investors and reporters, we fixate on it. Mark, what might this say about the popularity of that cheaper iPhone in particular, which is kind of a new strategy for Apple?
Right. It's possible this could be yet another swing and miss on the low end of the market. Remember, Apple's tried this before with the iPhone SE, discontinued after about 2.5 years. Earlier this year, they've tried this with the iPhone 5C, discontinued after 2 years as well. I would not be surprised if the iPhone XR is discontinued after 2 or 3 years or so, once they're able to get the functionality that they're bringing down in cost throughout the rest of the line at that lower price. But again, this is all about bringing these devices out at lower prices, and eventually things will meet in the middle, and this phone won't be necessary.
So, Walter, then what is your outlook for this holiday quarter?
Well, the flip side of Mark's argument is also that the XS and the XS Max are actually selling very well. And last year, when there was this belief that maybe the iPhone X crossing through $1,000 was going to limit some of the attractiveness of it, it actually was a great phone that sold in each of the quarters going forward. So it could be that the outlook ends up being positive, because this is a reflection that customers continue to gravitate to the higher priced phone. So even though you may not see unit growth, well, you're not going to see anything because the company doesn't report it anymore, you'll see some revenue growth still, just from the fact that they're getting their existing very loyal customer base to pay them more and more each year for their products.
We never quite know what the mix of the iPhones is. It's always anyone's guess, and we sort of try to deduce that based on the average selling price of the iPhone. Mark, what do we believe the mix is at this point? Do we have any indication of which phone consumers are really springing for?
I mean, last year the price points were exactly the same pretty much as they were this year, except for that additional high-end model. And like you said, the ASPs give us some color there. And Apple's comments that the iPhone X was the best-selling iPhone every week. That combination lets us know, and Walter might be able to attest to this, or if this is right, that the mix is skewed towards probably the XS and XS Max at this point, especially also because those two phones had much more runway so far in the quarter than the XR.
Curious, Walter, how is your job going to change now that Apple is not going to be reporting these unit sales? What kinds of information are you going to be looking for? How are you going to draw your conclusions?
Well, it's actually better for us because we've always approached this from the demand side. I've focused on the wireless operators. What are they saying about their upgrade rates? The life cycle of a phone has been extending ever since the iPhone 6. The Apple sold, what was it, 231 million phones several years ago. They still haven't reached that level. So the demand side analysis actually, I think, benefits. It's obviously for some of my peers who rely on the supply side and getting some of the data points out of confirmation of that later on. It might be a little bit more challenging. It'll be more volatile for them because there's not as much, I think, valid data points to check where those where some of that stuff's coming from.
Mark, I do want to get your thoughts on the developments in the trade war we're hearing now. Even more compelling words from the Chinese side. President Xi hitting back at some of the things that President Trump has said. What will all of this mean for Apple?
It really just depends on how long these tariffs, go on for, right? I mean, if you're looking at the political climate in the United States right now, it's very likely that the tariffs, if they come into place soon, will be around for either 2 more years or 6 more years. If you think about how long it would take a company that produces as many devices on an annual basis as Apple to move their supply chain out of China to countries perhaps like Malaysia and Vietnam that wouldn't be right in the middle of this trade war, that could take 2 or 3 years in itself. So I think Apple is going to take a wait-and-see approach. They're going to see what happens with the tariffs if they're implemented. They're going to wait out what the political climate will be in the United States. And while they're waiting, they're clearly doing some quiet measures against this. If you look at the price raises that they've done recently on some of their products, those are products specific to ones that are going to be affected by the tariffs. The Apple Pencil, one of the products, a $30 increase. The Mac Mini, another one of the products, a $300 increase. The MacBook Air, a $200 increase. The leather cases that they're selling for their products to cover the new iPads, those got significant price increases comparatively as well. So while they're waiting out the bigger picture, they're making small changes to avoid any short-term problems as well on their revenues and profits.
And some of those are fairly significant price increases, Walter. I mean, Apple obviously has a supply chain entrenched in China. The Chinese market is a huge part of Apple earnings. How concerned are you about this trade situation?
I mean, there's always a concern, but there's been a lot of noise. This impacts a lot of the companies that we cover, and if there's any company that has some level of pricing power in the market to pass that along to the customers and it gets digested well, it's obviously Apple, right? They've done this and gotten higher margins. Now you're talking about a company that has ridiculously high gross margins for a consumer electric product. They're going into a quarter that they're facing some currency headwinds, still guiding for strong margins. Again, it's something you have to always worry about and keep your eyes on. But again, it's in Apple's case, there's maybe a little less worry given their ability to increase price.
All right, Walter Piecyk, BTIG, thanks so much, as well as our very own Mark Gurman. We'll keep watching. Staying on trade, Alibaba co-founder Jack Ma didn't hold back on his opinion of the current trade spat. Speaking at the China International Import Expo in Shanghai, Ma called the China-U.S. trade war, quote, the most stupid thing in this world. Coming up, 23andMe may be able to tell you which medications will work best. We'll hear from CEO Anne Wojcicki on just what the new tests will tell you. That's next. Plus, Amazon's quest for a second headquarters may be drawing to a close. A look at the top cities in the running. This is Bloomberg. Biotech company 23andMe, known for its DNA tests that tell about their ethnic backgrounds and genetic health risks. Now it is adding pharmacogenetics, the study of gene-drug response, to that list. Last week, 23andMe won FDA approval for a test that can tell customers how they will respond to medications based on their genetic profile. While several other tests are on the market, 23andMe's is the first of its kind to get FDA approval for direct-to-consumer sale. So, why are some out there calling it dubious science? I sat down with CEO and co-founder Anne Wojcicki at the Breakthrough Prize Awards to discuss. Take a listen.
It's a huge step forward. I think it's one of the things people don't realize, that, every single one of us metabolizes medications in different ways. And so sometimes you can take a medication that works great for you, and I take it and it doesn't work great for me, or in the worst case scenario, I have an adverse event and you're fine. So I think it's really important. It's an important science to bring forward. So I'd say this is step one, and there's going to be many steps around pharmacogenetics, this whole genetics and drug interaction. So this is step one. We don't have any imminent plans of exactly when we'll have reports out to customers. We'll have to do more work with the FDA, but it is an incredible step forward. And I think my hope here is, like, when I think about my dreams, in 5 years, every single drug coming onto the market should have a pharmacogenetic component to their label. And right now you see that in cancer and all cancer therapies, but you don't see it in all the other medications.
So what drugs are we talking about here? I mean,
we're talking about things like, there's well-known drugs like Plavix is a common one. There's depressants, statins. Some people can take a statin and they get, muscle pain. So there's a lot of, this, like I said, psychiatric is one of the biggest areas. So there's a lot of medications that have already known associations. Plavix is always interesting for me because the state of Hawaii actually came out and changed some of their reimbursement laws, because so much of the Hawaiian population does not genetically respond to Plavix, so they actually made some statements specifically about it. So that was one of the most interesting cases for me. But for them, there's a lot of medications. When we look at numbers and when we have the tests out before, we could see roughly 30% of our customers all had a significant response.
Yeah. What is your response to the controversies? I mean, there are some people out there who are extremely excited about this, like you, and others who are saying this is dubious science. Why is the FDA approving it?
What's interesting? I think that's just it reminds me. I mean, we're so used to the controversy now. It's just a matter of time and education. And the science is so well established. I'm really, again, I look at people like Russ Altman, who used to be an advisor, who's a professor at Stanford. There's really great data out there about drug response. And, you know, not in everything, 100% not in everything, but for the most part, it hasn't been widely disseminated. It's not often taught in medical school. Pharmacists are pretty up to speed on this, but there's a disconnect. And I think that's actually, frankly, the role of what 23andMe does, is that sometimes we help bridge gaps when there's like, you know, there's information out there, but it's not necessarily part of the medical world right now. We're going to help make that a reality. And we're totally sympathetic. Like, the medical world will be out there making sure that people know what to do with this information.
Right, because the FDA is saying, but you can't actually use it to make medical decisions. And so it's almost like they're trying to have it both ways.
I think at some point, that's just it's a matter of time for us. Like, I think there'll be more analytical validity work for us to do, and we'll be able to make that happen at some point. But without a doubt, there's medications that are out there today where we can say, you know, if you have this specific mutation, you definitely don't want to take it because you might have a severe adverse event.
So what do you imagine the test will look like? What do you imagine the test will cost? What are the knowns?
Well, we want to make genetic testing affordable, and we want to keep you engaged. Like, I feel like, you know, it's your genome. How are we going to keep you engaged on that? You know, in some ways on drug testing, there's a lot of, you know, this is an area you really do want to integrate in with your physician, and you really do want to integrate with your pharmacist. So we're thinking about additional ways that we can make sure that this is like most useful for our customers.
And then what about all the other companies that are working on this stuff that aren't regulated?
That's a great question. So, you know, it's one of the things, and I've been tweeting about this, is that there is this controversy where you have 23andMe, which is a direct-to-consumer company, and we own it. Like, we do not require a physician, we do not require a genetic counselor, and we've gone through the FDA to prove that people can understand this information, that it's accurate, that it's safe, and that people can understand it. But there's a whole world out there that is not regulated, and that's the laboratory-developed test world. And those are companies that kind of slap on a physician on top. A lot of times people don't even know that there's a physician there, and they're kind of able to, you know, avoid going through the regulatory, the FDA process. So the FDA actually put out a warning the day after our authorization, specifically saying, you know, warning that there's a lot of other companies that have not gone through the FDA. And I think some of those claims, you know, I can't speak on behalf of the FDA, but some of the claims definitely cause concern. They cause concern for our scientists, and I think that they cause concern. So I think 23andMe is a strong advocate. You know, the FDA has the potential for innovating, and there needs to be one system that regulates all of these companies together.
I want to ask you one last question, and you have to go. But given that you work so closely with the government, and you probably have more insight into the sort of bridge between Silicon Valley and Washington than other companies might, how has that relationship changed under the Trump administration, for better and for worse? Do you see, are you concerned about the future of scientific and technological research, or no?
I think it's a great question. I think that in some ways it's hard to actually look at the specific political environment for me, because I think there's a couple things that have happened. Like, one, it's very clear this is an administration that doesn't want to regulate as much. Like, Trump is very clear about that. At the same time, we've had issues that have come up with Facebook, you know, Google, etc., that clearly show, you know, there are unintended consequences of these services. So it's an interesting mix, because it's an agency that clearly has not wanted to regulate, but now there's clearly some kind of push to regulate. So, you know, in that technology world, there's definitely, you know, things are going to change. In the healthcare space, I haven't seen, you know, like, it's, you know, I think Scott Gottlieb, the commissioner of the FDA, has done a fabulous job of actually trying to enable, you know, innovation and, you know, and push companies through. So I think he's done a great job of that.
Are you doing anything for the midterms? Have you been active around?
I am, you know, it's interesting. I feel like I try to be active in support at a federal level, and then it's interesting for me. My town is actually quite political this season, and so I feel like I get everything from the school district to, you know, clearly, you know, interesting Senate races. So I mean, listen, I'm pins and needles. We'll see what happens. It's obviously an incredibly important election, and everyone needs to vote. And that's one thing I always say. I was like, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. But if you didn't vote in this election, you got no business complaining anymore. 23andMe CEO and co-founder Anne Wojcicki there. Coming up,
Amazon has said it will announce the location of its second headquarters by the end of this year, while all eyes are on Virginia. And a new report that Amazon may not pick just one location, but split its headquarters between two. This is Bloomberg. The debate over the EU's proposed digital tax continues Tuesday, when European finance ministers will meet in Brussels to discuss. The proposed 3% tax would be applied to digital companies with total annual worldwide revenue of $860 million and EU revenue of $57 million. The digital tax will come into effect 2021 if no solution is reached. Well, more than a year ago, Amazon announced plans for a second corporate headquarters. It said could bring in $5 billion in investments and over 50,000 new jobs. Rumors have been swirling ever since, with Amazon not giving any hints. Now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the e-commerce giant plans to split its second headquarters evenly between two locations. According to the Journal, the new plan would divide the workforce with 25,000 employees in each city. This coming after reports Amazon progressed to late-stage talks with a small group of communities, including New York, Dallas, and Crystal Springs, Virginia. Here to discuss, Bloomberg's Spencer Soper in Seattle. Spencer, what do we know?
Not a whole lot more than we knew when they narrowed it to 20 cities. A flood of news over the weekend. The Washington Post reported that Crystal City, Virginia was a front runner, and a lot of people have been thinking about the D.C. region because, it's the power center, or just be a good place for Amazon to be, especially with, antitrust conversations bubbling up here and there. And now this latest news that it could be split between two cities, which there have been some hints from Amazon about that previously. And even they have said that this overall process, even cities that don't get the second headquarters, it still allowed them opportunities to make relationships and do research for other things like fulfillment centers and data warehouses or just satellite offices. So they're still looking. And I guess this reminds me like those tips about playing the lottery, that if it's a big jackpot and you get in on the office pool, you're likely to share the prize.
It's interesting that the Washington Post is the one that reported that initial potential scoop. That, of course, the paper is owned by Jeff Bezos. And if Amazon, divides its second headquarters there, you've got Jeff Bezos in the town where near where the president is essentially throwing barbs periodically.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, is that the D.C. region is one where they actually had three places. So they've got Northern Virginia, they've got Maryland, and they've got the city of D.C. itself. All three of those were among the 20 finalists. So does this splitting of the headquarters between two locations mean that it still all be in D.C. to split among those jurisdictions, or are we actually talking about two different labor pools? So that is an important thing to suss out at this point.
So what do we know about New York and Dallas?
New York, the big thing about New York is obviously the labor pool. It's got the biggest labor pool out there. The other thing that New York has that Amazon might crave is obscurity. You can blend into New York. In Seattle, Amazon's really become known as the boogeyman of urban woes. It's blamed for traffic and skyrocketing home prices that are leaving people homeless and the such. No one blames New York City's problems on any one particular company. People blame New York City problems on New York City. So that's one thing that might attract them there. And then Dallas is simply in Texas very business-friendly environment that could also have its appeal to Amazon, given some of the backlash it's faced again in Seattle on things like a head tax to fund homelessness and that sort of thing.
Now, Amazon has said that they would make a decision before the end of the year. Once that is decided, what is the timeline? When would these new headquarters come to fruition? When would these new employees be hired?
That hasn't been clear. They've basically just set a long-term trajectory of, investing $5 billion and hiring 50,000 people over 15 to 18 years. So, and they were looking for a place where they could immediately slide in with a presence. So one thing they were looking for was just some space immediately. So how many of those people would be hired right out of the gate is unclear. But long term, they were looking at 50,000 and $5 billion over 15 to 18 years.
All right, Spencer Soper for us in Seattle. We'll keep watching step by step. Well, Activision Blizzard is facing fan backlash. The company announced a new mobile entry to its Diablo franchise called Diablo Immortal. But gamers were not keen on the move away from the PC. Many took their voices to social media and added as much as 413,000 dislikes on the game's YouTube trailer. Shares of the company fell as much as 6.9% in Monday trading. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Be sure to tune in for our special election coverage Tuesday evening. We will be live wall-to-wall with all the latest results as they come in and have special coverage of how tech is impacting the election. It's going to be a late night. This is Bloomberg.